The good news is that earthworm eye view did not last forever. And I was rescued from that by this slowly spinning white light that had fine silvery and golden tendrils around it. And it came towards me and it opened up like a rip in the fabric of that ugly earthworm eye view realm and led up into this brilliant, ultra real gateway valley.
Welcome, Dr. Alexander. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, Laura, thanks so much for having me on. It's great to be with you this morning.
You're welcome. I'm looking forward to the conversation and do have some questions after that. You have an exciting topic today on the near-death experience and, about science and kind of just bringing them all together. So could you take us through the near-death experience? We'll start off with that.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out that I'd spent the first 54 years of my life. I grew up in a very scientific family. My father was a globally renowned neurosurgeon. Now, very important in my story is that I was adopted. That is something that was a gigantic piece of my life and led to tremendous resolution with my NDE. So that's a very important statement. But my adoptive father, although he was very scientific, he also had a very strong belief in God. For him, God and prayer was part of his healing as a neurosurgeon, and he was fully aware of modern physics and cosmology. Now, like many who grew up in the 60s and 70s, like I did, I always knew science is a pathway to truth. And I remember I made the same mistake so many other people make in thinking that it was Newtonian deterministic science that led to this deep truth, but it's not. It's quantum physics, which absolutely demands a richer understanding of the brain-mind connection and the nature of reality. So that's what I was due for, was an incredible education about the deeper nature of reality here. And so my NDE was interesting to the scientific community because my coma was completely caused by meningitis. That's an important point. There's a myth out there in the lay press that it was a medication-induced coma, which couldn't be further from the truth. I was on no sedative medication when I went deep into coma early in that week, the Monday morning that I went into coma, November 10th, 2008. And I was on heavy sedation when I came out of coma on day 7, Sunday, a week later. So that, and it's important to the scientific community because there's all the difference in the world between a medication-induced coma and a meningitis coma, because the meningitis leaves you far less explanation for how any kind of conscious experience could happen. And in fact, in my case, there's a medical case report on my medical records written by 3 doctors who were not involved in my care, but fascinated by my recovery. That medical case report was in the September 2018 Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases. And importantly for your audience, that report to any medical mind makes it clear my brain was far too damaged to have any kind of dream or hallucination, much less this profound experience that I have. So the diagnosis of meningitis-induced coma is a critical part of understanding all of this and why my case is so important to the scientific community. So I'll briefly go into what that experience was like. Important to point out that one very unusual ingredient of my near-death experience that I really haven't heard about to this severe degree anywhere else is amnesia. And initially, my brain recovering, but still affected by the meningitis, thought, well, that amnesia could make sense because I still thought that memories might be stored in the brain. I now know they're not. That's something we discuss in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, the 3rd book. And that's the last nail in the coffin of materialist neuroscience, that memories aren't even stored there. There's a lot to be said about that. But the reality is, in this amnesic state, I started in what I call the earthworm eye view, very primitive, coarse, unresponsive realm. It's like being in dirty jello, deep underground, this pounding, smashing sound that was monotonous kept coming at me. I had no body awareness at any point in this, and it seemed to go for a very long time. But the good news is that earthworm eye view did not last forever. And I was rescued from that by this slowly spinning white light that had fine silvery and golden tendrils around it, and it came towards me, and it opened up like a rip in the fabric of that ugly earthworm eye view realm and led up into this brilliant ultra real gateway valley. And I cannot tell you the difference between those realms and how shocking that was. The Gateway Valley is where we reunite with the souls of departed loved ones, go through our life reviews, which can involve our entire lives, and often involves the events relived from the perspective of everyone involved. So life reviews are an incredibly important topic. We can go into much more detail later. But I couldn't have an Eben Alexander life review, but I ended up seeing life reviews in a very profound fashion. So anyway, I've arrived in this beautiful Gateway Valley. Things are much more real there than here. It's one of the shocking things about near-death experiences, because they occur in that timeless, eternal realm of the soul. We can see our entire life, birth, death, everything in between, past life events, potentialities for future events. All of this is visible simultaneously. And it's one of the shocking things to try and explain to people. And one of the reasons why these are described as ineffable or indescribable beyond our words. This beautiful Gateway Valley, I was a speck of awareness on a butterfly wing. There were millions of other butterflies looping and spiraling in vast formations. And I remember looking down, there was this meadow down below us, and it was surrounded by a rich green forest. There were sparkling waterfalls and crystal blue pools, incredibly vivid, kind of rich spiritual world. And in many ways, I often describe this as Plato's world of ideals, that is, of ideal templates, but for the individual soul to go through. And that's what I was witnessing in this beautiful Gateway Valley. I remember this summer breeze that blew through, and I later described it as the breath of God or divine wind. And that was my first awareness in that amnesic state of the role of that God force of pure love in having all this happen. And also beginning to realize my connection to that infinitely loving God force that we co-create with. It's not that God that does any kind of judgment, but provides the pure light. Any sense of judgment, from my perspective, is really kind of from our higher soul and soul group perspective, and not from some superior being that recognizes the divinity and sanctity in all of us. That is something that we come to recognize, bringing back these lessons from the NDE world. So anyway, on this butterfly wing, I witnessed thousands of beings down in the meadow below, dancing, joy, merriment, festivities, children playing, dogs jumping, incredible mirth. And all of it was being fueled because up above were these swooping orbs of these pure angelic choirs. They were emanating chants and anthems, hymns, thundering, powering through my awareness, this incredible awe and majesty, and yet shockingly also deep memories of, oh, this is home. This is spiritual home, and it's so familiar. In fact, I think that's one of the reasons the book Proof of Heaven hit with such a blast, is it reminded so many souls of something they knew deep down. And I heard a lot from that group by emails and people at presentations, et cetera. It was very reaffirming of the kind of commonality and sameness of this experience. It's why near-death experiences have such similar patterns that show us that they're revealing a realm that's absolutely real, even though the details of the stories can change quite a bit. So anyway, in that beautiful setting, the best news was I wasn't alone. There was a beautiful young woman, a spiritual guide, who I later came to call my guardian angel, sparkling blue eyes, high cheekbones, broad smile, high forehead. And she never said a word to me. She never had to, but she looked at me with this look of pure love. And her message to me, delivered telepathically and kind of empathically: you are deeply loved and cherished forever. You have nothing to fear. You're richly cared for. And I cannot tell you how reassuring that message was. And as I said earlier, my entire life had been this subconscious wound from the fact that my birth mother, who was 16 and unwed, had left me behind at age 11 days. But then she wasn't willing to sign the papers for social services to put me up for adoption. So I got stuck in a baby dorm for 4 months. Now, I'm not looking for sympathy because I was adopted into a wonderful, loving family. But I can tell you that 4 months was a challenge to me. And that's what led to all this kind of subconscious doubt as to whether or not I was even worthy of love that was through much of my life. And it was only through going through my near-death experience And that necessitated a reunion with my birth family that happened 1 year before my coma. A lot of that story is in Proof of Heaven. It's an incredibly rich story to tell you how this could have been such a powerful lesson of healing and learning and teaching for me. So anyway, in this beautiful Gateway Valley, I had this guardian angel. I'd never really read the NDE literature, and I didn't realize yet, but I would in the weeks after my coma when I wrote down 20,000 words and then started reading about others' NDEs. My older son, Eben IV, had warned me not to do that 2 days after I got out of the coma. He was majoring in neuroscience in college at the time and knew every time you revisit a memory, you change it. So he said, you've got to write down your memories before you read anyone else's near-death account. Best advice I've ever gotten. I'm glad he advised that, and that's what I did. At any rate, so in this beautiful Gateway Valley, what happened next were these angelic choirs above provided yet another musical portal. Each one of these light portals I'm describing was navigable because of music that was associated. And of course, music in that realm is an ideal form. It's not limited by the physics of our four-dimensional space-time, which greatly limits the form music can take for us. And I think that that ideal form of music is the source for the best composers and musicians in history. That's where they get their stuff, but you can't bring it back perfectly intact as it is in that ideal world. So for me, now these angelic choirs are providing yet another musical portal. I remember seeing all of four-dimensional space-time, which I could vaguely sense below all this, all of that collapsing down, all of that rich spiritual realm with its eternal time course. Very important point. In the spiritual realm, it's not limited by earth time. And that's why, some apparent paradoxes, if they were locked to earth time, like a loved one having, reincarnated before you get there, is impossible, according to my view, given the role of love and connection between souls as being the absolutely critical currency of that spiritual realm. At any rate, all of that collapsing down, including that spiritual realm and its kind of deep time, sense of a completely different ordering of time, all of that down until I entered what I call the core. The core was an infinite inky blackness. I think in some ways, I might be describing going beyond the boundary that many near-death experiencers talk about. They talk about a boundary where they sense if they go beyond it, they won't be coming back. And the core realm in many ways was maybe a glimpse beyond that boundary. But to me, I describe it as a dazzling darkness in that core. It was all dualities of this world completely resolved into oneness. So we live in a world with darkness and light, good, evil, masculine, feminine, all these spectra of possibilities, of qualities. But in that core realm, every bit of it is wrapped into this one perfect oneness. And in fact, I felt at times in the core like I was oscillating on the edge of a black hole, because at times it was complete oneness, and I recognized that that God mind was the absolute source of my own conscious awareness, not the ego mind, but the much richer and deeper sense of a connected higher soul. And that's what I was experiencing. And yet, as I said, that I was in this kind of bistable state in the core where I would then see the incredible dazzling darkness, but also a brilliant orb of light that I think was there. I sensed as a translator or interpreter. And there were many lessons taught all through this kind of experience, these different levels. Most importantly was a vision that took me several years to even understand through a lot of deep meditation. But that vision is one that I now call the living tapestry. It's a vision I had in the core realm, but it showed me this interwoven fabric of higher dimensional kind of threading. And this fabric was all leading to this golden center. And for a long time, I called that vision Indra's net, because it resembled something out of Hindu cosmology. But in fact, this one's different. What I experienced was different in that there was all of this kind of multiple lifetimes, going through life reviews as course corrections, all led towards an improvement and an evolution of consciousness itself. So it's very different from Buddhist concepts of reincarnation, where it's just get off the wheel of suffering. This is much more of a grace-filled, and this is where the input of near-death experiences from all different cultures is so important, because the near-death experience literature is quite clear on that binding force of love, the unity that we all share through that mental or spiritual space, how we're all truly in this together, and how we really are here to take care of each other. And it's a very different message from the common message of our conventional materialist culture, which preaches that we're separate beings and that we're in competition with each other. And it couldn't be further from the truth. But this kind of deep revelation is something I think humanity has been working towards for thousands of years. And it's one that emerges from the near-death experience community in very clear fashion. But it shows us we've had it wrong with this kind of false sense of brain creates consciousness. We're all separate beings, into realizing we're sharing one consciousness. And that one mind is something that we are all part of. And that's why that binding force of love is so important. So these are all incredible visions that came from the NDE and from, meditation. I use sacredacoustics.com. It's a very powerful tool for a deep conscious exploration by causing a left-right oscillation in the lower brainstem. And that is something that allows our conscious awareness to be set free. At any rate, in my near-death experience, I would spontaneously tumble back down from that sanctum sanctorum of the divine, that core realm, back down to the earth where my view. And by remembering the musical notes that were associated with that perfect musical melody, I could conjure up that light portal and ascend back up into the Gateway Valley, always reassured by that beautiful guardian angel. You're deeply loved and cherished forever. You have nothing to fear, richly cared for. And seeing all the beauty in that realm and many lessons that occurred in the Gateway Valley, but also then ascending again through those angelic choirs to the highest level for some of the deepest lessons in the core realm. And I'd always been told in the core, you're not here to stay, you'll be going back. We'll teach you many things. But I thought that meant going back to the earth where my view. And I'd done that trip many a time. And by using my memory of the musical notes, I could conjure up these various light portals. But there came a time when I could no longer ascend from that earth where my view into the Gateway Valley, just as I'd been told in the core many a time, you're not here to stay, you'll be going back. And this is when I saw thousands of beings off around me going into the distance, heads bowed, some holding candles. And there was this murmuring energy coming from them. And what I called all that weeks later when I wrote all this up was that was the power of prayer. And that's what was basically guiding me back to this world. And then the last thing I saw in my near-death experience, there were 6 faces that would bubble up out of the muck, and they'd say a few words and then disappear. And, I can remember those visions as clearly today as if the whole thing happened this morning. I mean, it's incredibly rich, this memory of these faces appearing. They're important because they were people who were, close friends, family, and one of them, one of my physicians who was also a neighbor and a very close friend. But they appeared to me in these visions and would say some words, and my amnesia was still very active, so I couldn't understand the words, and then they just disappeared. And it was really the last of those faces that most got my attention. It was a 10-year-old boy. My amnesia is still very powerful, but I had thought through this whole thing, because I had no memory of connection to other souls, that this whole journey could continue or it could cease, that it didn't matter what the outcome was. But now I could sense, because this 10-year-old boy, there was this pleading sense, and I didn't know what the words were he was saying to me. It turns out the real situation here on Earth was that my son Bond, great name for him, you will find out, Bond was 10 years old at the time. They protected him from the worst news during that week. But on that final day, the doctors held a family conference where they said, gone from a 10% chance of survival down to 2% with no chance of recovery. And that's when they decided to take me off the ventilator, stop the antibiotics. And that was when I started coming back to this world. So that was a giant shock to my doctors. They had no idea how I was coming back, but my brain was still horribly affected by the meningitis. So in fact, even as I'm waking up and fighting the ventilator, and they pulled out the tube and I said, thank you, I still didn't recognize my loved ones at the bedside. I was a little confused at first, although those memories returned very rapidly as language was also coming back very rapidly. but initially didn't even recognize my mother, my sons, my sisters. All I knew when I was first starting to come around was where I've been in that incredible journey. And that journey, if you would ask me how long it was, I would have said weeks or months, years maybe. And yet it had to happen within 7 Earth days. But again, people can have an entire life review during a 10-minute cardiac arrest. So once you kind of recognize that that realm is timeless and eternal, you start to appreciate the power the universe has in allowing us to go through these kind of relivings of our lives and planning of next incarnations. At any rate, those 36 hours after waking up, I was in and out of a paranoid delusional psychotic nightmare. In fact, at some point, I even was very paranoid and thought my doctors were trying to kill me, et cetera. So it was nutty, but I knew it was a delusion. I knew it was fake, as opposed to the deep spiritual journey that happened when my brain was very inactivated. I was in deep coma. That was way too real to be real. That stuck with me. Those memories are as sharp and vivid today as if it all just happened, as opposed to the psychotic nightmares, which was really an ICU psychosis. It's something I've seen as a doctor from the other side many a time, but living through it was completely different, I promise you. But that cleared up within 36 hours. And then over 2 months, I had all my memories returned. Another point made about that case report is that the peer review editors of that journal challenged the authors. How can you explain this? That he had this unprecedented, apparently miraculous recovery. And the doctors who did the report said it's because he had a near-death experience. That's what allowed a miraculous healing. They knew of other similar cases, like Anita Morjani, who healed her lymphoma through an NDE, Dr. Mary C. Neal, who had an over 30-minute warm water drowning, kayaking in Chile in the late 1990s. And Dr. Mary C. Neal was brought to the surface dead, but ended up making a complete recovery. And like me and Anita, travels the world sharing her story. These stories are there for all of us because what they show is we all have the capacity as spiritual beings to invoke the healing and wholeness powers that are inherent in that spiritual realm and bring that wholeness and healing into our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for sharing your journey with us. Kind of wanted to, mention, you did talk about a lot about the hallmarks of what we call the near-death experience, as you said. So that would be like the music, the life review, the telepathy, not having a body, the void. When you talked about, and I kind of wanted to bring that up, you said the inky blackness. Are you referring to the void?
What I'm referring to there is what I call the core. And that is, to me, it's a complete resolution of all dualities, a complete sense of oneness and connection with the meaning and purpose of the universe. And I guess some people might call that the void. To me, it was just the deepest level that I went to, but it's hard for me to imagine going any deeper given the pure oneness and apparent unity that was so clear throughout that. And I experienced it several times, multiple times that I would enter up through these musical light portals, and always taught many lessons and then spontaneously tumbling back down to that earth for my view.
Okay. Yeah, because a lot of people do talk about, and I think everybody comes at that topic a little different and what they experience. And it's really interesting. I know when I came out of the body from my near-death experience, I went right into the void, which was black, and then there was nothing there, and then I went into the light. So it was like this pathway into the light.
Right. Well, for me, I often describe it as a dazzling darkness. To me, in some ways, I mean, from the earthly perspective, it seemed kind of paradoxical. But to me, this thing you're calling the void, to me, it was absolutely filled with light, love, energy, and potentiality. So it wasn't like an emptiness void, but it was kind of paradoxically filled of all potential, and yet had this appearance of complete blackness with kind of a dazzling nature to it. So it's something where our language just fails miserably to explain it. But potentially, I think that might be explaining what you're calling the void. Although I wouldn't say it was anything to be afraid of at all. It was incredibly comforting and seemed like a spiritual home that just brought back deep memories of connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I didn't feel fear. It was just like there was nothing there. And then I realized I didn't have a body. And then the light came and then I went into the light. So it was
Uh,
just a really interesting experience. I didn't spend a lot of time there trying to figure it out, what it felt like or pay any attention to that. I was just
uh,
realizing when I was out of the body. Now, when you came out of the body, did you recognize if there was anything else there, like a light, or if you were just consciousness? Were you a orb?
I was just a pure awareness. And
Mhm,
like I said, it all started, my first awareness in my near-death experience was of this kind of amnesic state where I had no knowledge of Earth, humanity, this universe. It was really an empty slate. So I started at a very primitive kind of course level. But I think that is what allowed me to kind of build up these kind of higher and higher levels, and then to see how they're all interconnected multiple times. I mean, to me, it was a fascinating kind of adventure and experience to understand and to demonstrate this nature of the universe.
mhm. Yeah, I know because I'm trying to put pieces together too and find the verbiage. We don't have a lot of like verbiage on it. We're kind of, bringing that in now that we've had a lot of people having these experiences and we're trying to, put words around it.
Right.
So, and the only reason I'm asking that is because when I was in the black, what I call the void, I realized I didn't have the body, but I knew I was a consciousness. I was still aware. But after that, I had a out of body experience during a yoga session, and there was this white light hovering over me, and I reached out to get it, and then I went into this white light orb, which was a consciousness, and then in my awareness, being in that, I looked down at my body and knew I was out of the body, and then I
Mhm.
was brought back into the body when I knew I shouldn't be out of the body. So
Wow.
yeah, just trying to put pieces together. Are we
Right.
actually the orbs, the white light consciousness, the awareness without the
Right.
body? Do you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Well, I've
Hmm.
certainly, as I said, I sense this brilliant orb of light in the core realm. So
Hmm.
this kind of dazzling darkness, there was this occasional separation where I'd see this brilliant orb of light that to me was kind of like the Omega consciousness that Pierre Teilhard de Chardin talks about, the Omega point, this brilliant kind of ultimate destination of our kind of mental and spiritual energy. And that's really, I mean, that kind of description makes perfect sense to me, especially given that living tapestry vision I had with the incredibly rich golden core that everything basically led to. It showed me that there was actually a goal, something that all of consciousness throughout the universe was converging towards. And we're all participating as sentient beings in that evolution of consciousness itself. And certainly orb energy is something I'm very familiar with. In fact, I know often when I would give talks about my experience and I get to the identity of that beautiful guardian angel, because people who've read the book Proof of Heaven will realize, oh my gosh, that book comes to an amazing ending when I discover the identity 4 months after my coma of that beautiful guardian angel, because to me, she was just a mystery. I'd never read the NDE literature before. So I wrote my 20,000 words of my memories. Then I started diving into that literature and was surprised to find that that spiritual guide that you encounter in an NDE was almost always someone of great importance to you in your life. And yet I knew this woman so well from our mind meld in my NDE, and yet I also knew I'd never met her. So that was a big mystery, back and forth, up and down, trying to understand it. We discuss a lot more of that process of wrestling with that truth in our third book, Living in a Mindful Universe. That book was co-written with my partner and wife, Karen Newell. And that book is all about the science and spirituality and how they're coming together through these experiences. But whenever I've talked about that part of the story, the picture I got in the mail 4 months after my coma, and all of a sudden realizing the identity of that guardian angel, every time I told that story, hundreds of times, my eyes would fill with tears. It was very emotional for me. And I always thought, well, that's an emotional memory. And then people started sending me pictures that they would take of me on stage giving this talk, and on the slide screen, you'd see this picture of my guardian angel, the picture I received in the mail 4 months post-coma. And there would be this brilliant orb of light floating, white or purple light floating nearby. So, and I think that was Betsy's soul. So the
Beautiful.
reason I felt so emotional was because she's really there when I'm telling that story. She's with me all the time, of course. And I can encounter her soul in deep meditation, sometimes, not always. But anyway, the meditation has been key to me. I use sacred acoustics. It's a form of binaural beat brainwave entrainment. I've used that an hour or two a day for the last 13 years. It's been incredibly important in helping me return to cultivate relationships with everything that I met, and that incredible God force, and the beautiful guardian angel and others I described. For example, if I had scripted my NDE, my adoptive father would have been there. He passed over 4 years before my coma, and yet he was nowhere to be found until a meditation 2.5 years after my coma, when I encountered my father again. And he made it clear to me. Often that kind of encounter in meditation, I'm sure you're aware, can come where all the information comes at once. It's not just like a linear narrative, but boom, all of a sudden, all the understanding. And in that particular meditation, my only question was, am I on the right path? And it turns out that his answer was yes. You know, differential frequency brainwave entrainment for manipulation and transcendental states of consciousness is absolutely taking you there. Consciousness is fundamental prior to matter in this universe. And that binding force of love is absolutely essential to all of it. And so, in fact, the way he put it to me is he couldn't be apparent to me in my NDE, because the way he explained it was, if he had been, in spite of the fact that I had a 1 in 10 million diagnosis of E. coli meningitis in an adult, because most E. coli meningitis is in newborns, rare beyond the age of 3 months. So yes, I have to defend my level of maturity. My doctors were challenged by that fact of my illness. But you know, that's the key, is that it was such an extraordinary illness with this incredible recovery. And that beautiful guardian angel was absolutely right at the core of my kind of healing and understanding. And
Now, was the guardian angel somebody that you knew in life, or is it just somebody like a being from the other side?
well, this is where the book Proof of Heaven is absolutely essential to get it. And spoiler alert, I'm not going to tell the whole thing here because it's such a rich story, but it has everything to do with my adoption history. And I'll share just a few pieces from the book, from Proof of Heaven. Was I'd given up on trying to find my birth mother. Okay, all my 20s, 30s, 40s, that was never mine. Forget about it, because the children's home had very strict rules trying to prevent reunions, etc. And so I'd gotten very used to the fact, okay, your birth mother's not looking for you, forget about it. So then my older son, Eben the Fourth, was doing a school project in February 2000. He was in 6th grade, school up in Massachusetts. And the project involved more family history. So we needed biological history. So I wrote the children's home again. Okay, any information? I know you're probably going to tell me no. Well, 2 weeks later was the deadline for me to call the social worker back. I called her up. I was actually driving through a blizzard, taking my older son, Eben the Fourth, to go skiing up in Maine. And she said, "Why, I did finding something out. Are you sitting down?" Well, I was driving through a blizzard, but yes, I was sitting down. She said, "Your birth parents got married." Now, I cannot tell you what a shocker that was. I had never thought, everything I knew from the children's home was they'd gone their separate ways. And she said, "There's more. They had 3 children." So I had a full biological family out there with 3 siblings. And then she said, "But your younger sister died 2 years ago." That would have been 1998. And the social worker was very constrained by North Carolina laws that prevented her from revealing identity or fostering communication. So she had to kind of make up a story. And the story at that time was they're still grieving the loss of that daughter. So it's not a good time to come back in their lives. And if you read adoption literature, you will realize one of the worst things that can happen is, as an adult, an adoptee gets another rejection from the birth mother. And it sent me into a tailspin. It was wicked. dark night of the soul is the best way to describe it. I stopped saying prayers with my two sons at night. I stopped going to church. That was just the end of my belief in power of prayer and a loving personal God. And it was like a middle finger to the universe. That was kind of my attitude. And that's why it's so important that 7 years later, walking on a beach in South Carolina with two of my adopted sisters, they said, don't you think it's time you should reach out your birth family again? They could tell that, that swing and a miss had been very damaging, but that I still had a hole in my life that could best be solved by resolving some of those issues about my origins and my birth family. And they were right. And that's when I wrote a letter to the Children's Home, this time got a positive answer, a letter back from my birth sister, well, without identifying information, but we set the stage for us all to meet October 7th October 5th of 2007. That's when I met my birth family walking down a sidewalk in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where I'd gone to undergraduate many years earlier. And for the first time in 54 years, hugged my birth mother, and then minutes later hugged my birth father. That weekend, I met my birth brother and sister. In many weeks and months afterwards, reunions with other cousins, aunts, uncles, etc. A lot of that is described in Proof of Heaven. At any rate, I cannot tell you how powerful that reunion was. And then, of course, the beautiful guardian angel that appeared to me in my coma is finally identified 4 months after the coma with a picture sent in the mail. I'll just put it that way. That's enough said, but it's an absolutely astonishing story. I think it's one of the reasons why so many people love that book, Proof of Heaven. And I can just tell you that in the 18 years since my coma, since all that, I've been through a tremendous amount of work with other experiencers, with scientists around the world who study this, and can now tell you without any question, scientifically, the afterlife has been proven. And to anybody who needs proof of that, for one thing, I'd steer you to our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, which is a great source of the one mind hypothesis. But also, I would suggest bigelowinstitute.org. And if you go to bigelowinstitute.org, you'll find 29 essays that were written 5 years ago, all by scientists who had at least 5 years of research experience studying the afterlife. And they basically, we're going to give 3 monetary awards for those essays, but the essays from all over the world in all different cultures were so different and so powerful that they ended up giving out 29 monetary awards. So anyway, all of them are there, free to the reading public. And if any materialist scientist gets up and says, there's no such thing as NDEs, they're impossible, modern science discredits them, all that scientist is admitting is that he's willfully ignorant. He hasn't taken the time to read any of those Bigelow Institute essays, because they make a very convincing case for the reality of the afterlife.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I love that for you, because when we do get to resolve some of those things in our lives, it brings a lot of healing. So I love that for you. So, and kind of want to talk about the healing. So you did mention life review. Part of my coming back here was to help people with a life review now, so we can get started on it, and they don't have to wait until they pass over to do one. Basically and then I downloaded a process for it. So that's one of my services that I help people with. But I kind of wanted to get into a little bit more on the life review, because pretty much everything that they show me is a life review, because we have a life review going on now, but a lot of people aren't aware of it. Because what do? We wake up, we do the same thing every day in, day out, day in, day out, until we have this awareness, like, I want to make change, or I want to do something different, or I want to help people, right? And until we make that conscious choice, then our life changes. And so we're living a life review right now, right? So part of me is to help people to do that and integrate that and transform their lives, because we do have that rebirth cycle. And I think you've talked about that before. It's, you have life, and then you have your life review, you have your death, and then the life review. And then you base your next life off of your life review. And it's like a constant cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw that in that beautiful living tapestry vision. life reviews were like a course correction. And it was clear that a soul couldn't, start in one physical lifetime and get to that complete oneness with the divine in one lifetime. That's why we often have this beautiful interweaving of multiple lifetimes approaching that. And why it's also very important to stress the difference between this and the kind of Buddhist or other religious ideas of reincarnation, where you're basically trying to get off the wheel of suffering. This is very, very different from that. And yet this is fully supported by near-death experiences across all cultures and belief systems. So a much more kind of open view of the power of life reviews and as a mid-course correction, and then this kind of reliving of events. So we can, in the life review, and the data for this comes from a paper by Dr. Bruce Grayson. He is a skeptical psychiatrist who's worked at University of Virginia more than 45 years studying near-death experiences. He's probably written more than any other MD on earth about near-death experiences, very knowledgeable. And I think it was the fall of 2021, he wrote an excellent paper. It was in the Journal of Near-Death Studies. And in that, he reviewed almost 700 life reviews. Sorry, I'm actually just seeking some information on this. But he reviews 700 life reviews in more than 1,000 NDE cases. He estimates that about half of NDEs have life reviews involved. And the important statistics I would like to share from his paper is that 37%, more than a third of life reviews describe the entire life. Nothing is omitted. And for most of us, we go, wait a minute, how can that happen during like a 10-minute cardiac arrest? And all that means is we fail to understand how important this notion of timelessness, of kind of the spatialization of time, that we can see birth, death, everything in between. You have simultaneous access to all the events of your life. And that is a strange situation that gives a lot more information than just living your life forward one step at a time. About half of the life reviews in Grayson's report said that it was a reliving, not just a remembering of events, as if the events were still ongoing. 76%, 3/4 of them, stressed that the life review was from the perspective of everyone involved. That's probably one of the most important points. In other words, if you mistreat others in your life review, you get to feel what that mistreatment felt like to them. So in other words, the golden rule, treat others as you would like to be treated, is written into the very fabric of the universe through the fact that 3/4 of life reviews involve reviewing the events from the perspective of everyone. And then 84% in his series said that the life reviews were more real than lived events. So to consider life reviews as some vague remembering of events is completely wrong and misses the deep lesson of NDEs about the importance to the universe of how we interact and how we think and treat each other. How is it the universe remembers and allows us to relive all of that? It's pretty astonishing, actually. And yet it just demands that scientists who are interested in describing the nature of reality have to really go back to square one and figure in that this kind of extreme importance is paid to the events of human lives and to their choices and decisions, and to how much those choices and decisions reflect love, compassion, and kindness for others, or do they reflect a narcissistic kind of egotistical selfishness? If that's the case, you get to feel every bit of that during your life review. And, that's not something I'd recommend for anybody. But the reality is all of this matters to the universe. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right. It does. It matters from all perspectives. That's why we all have a perspective, and we're all here to learn a lesson, and we all have a takeaway from it. But I also want to kind of add to that, because it's not the life review. A lot of people think it's a punishment or judgment or karma, or you know what I mean? And it's not really set up that way. They've shown me it's more about learning, evolving.
Right.
You know,
in many ways, I look at the life review as almost neutral. It's not one way or the other, except everything is occurring in the setting of this brilliant, loving light of that God force. And therefore, any kind of selfishness or greediness or being mean to others looks especially horrible. So, in that setting, and especially because we get to feel it, it comes back at you how you've treated others. That's one of the most beautiful qualities of the life review is it's like a mirror. I often say that, what the energy we put out to this universe in many ways is reflected back to us. So put out a lot of good, loving, caring, kind energy, and that's what the universe ends up putting back at us. Put out a lot of selfish, greedy, mean energy, and that's what you'll experience in your world. That'll come back at you. So it's really just a simple lesson of we'd rather be treated kindly by others. Let's just do that. Take that action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I know the few people who I've heard had a like a hellish near-death experience, but they come back and they say, those are just things that I did. It's not that there's a physical hell or anything. It's just I had to see what was going on and so I can understand it.
Right. Well, I think
Yeah.
that's the important point is that they're feeling it, that it's coming back at them. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and this is why NDEs all across the spectrum, and as you bring up the hellish NDEs, which I think most series would say are probably 5 to maybe 8 or 10% at the most. But also, we would expect them to be even more underreported than positive NDEs. I mean, all NDEs are underreported because people are worried that we call crazy. They're not necessarily in our culture willing to share it. But the positive ones probably are easier for people to talk about than the negatives. Although, as you made the point, and it's very important, the negative ones still have the same positive transformational effects. So people still come away with the same kind of powerful belief in a loving spiritual force at the co-creative center of the universe, that God force. And of course, it's important to remember it doesn't matter if you're tempted to call that force God, Allah, Brahman, Vishnu, Jehovah, Yahweh, Great Spirit, Tao, all the many, many, many words that humans have used to describe that force of love and compassion and co-creativity at the core of the universe. The reality is we're all talking about the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a
Yeah.
force of love, compassion, kindness. The NDE community is what really makes that clear as a bell. And there's a book I often recommend by a friend of mine, Robert Koppes, Coppes. He's from the Netherlands. He wrote a book called The Essence of Religions. I highly recommend that book. He basically takes the 5 main religions, the 3 Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and also Hinduism and Buddhism, and compares all those 5 with the lessons of NDEs. And from his perspective in that book, the near-death experience is the tip of the spear. That's the gold standard. And he talks about how the various religions come close or don't to all of that. But ultimately, it's teaching us that what that force cares about is love, compassion, kindness, mercy, acceptance, when necessary, forgiveness. So those are the ways to enrich our lives, to make it so that our life review is smooth. And as you say, we're going through life reviews as we live. The way my wife Karen puts it, she says, do a daily review. Why wait? Don't save up all that baggage. Just take care of it now. Start treating people well now. Start treating yourself well now. When I talk about forgiveness, I'm not just talking about forgiving others, but forgive yourself for some of the errors your ego might be trying to label you with. And then
Mm-hmm.
again, this is where meditation, sacredacoustics.com, going deep within an hour to a day has been very, very beneficial to me at resolving a lot of these issues and taking full advantage of kind of this kind of moral and ethical demonstration about self that's so much a part of life reviews and putting it into my life through living these events and through
Mm-hmm.
meditating daily or on a regular basis to basically cultivate a much richer connection to that God force.
Right. And you made a couple good points there. Forgiveness is very essential for evolution because it's not necessarily saying it's okay what they did, but it's helping us to resolve it, let go, move on, and put it to rest. And so we're not constantly following up into those cycles all the time, those patterns that we're working on or working through. And the other thing I kind of want to bring in with the, as far as the religious belief, they say we're sinners and, we sin. But from my understanding of being on the other side, and I think you've mentioned it too, like you don't do any wrong. There is no wrong.
Right. Well, that's what we're here. We have free will as a gift.
Mm-hmm.
And that free will allows us to make all these choices. And we can make those choices out of love, compassion, kindness, forgiveness, or we can make those choices out of fear, hatred, divisiveness, living the false myth of materialism. But we have the choice to make. And when Proof of Heaven, the other thing mentioned by that spiritual guide, you're deeply loved and cherished forever, richly cared for, you can do no wrong, as you point out. But, some people take that the wrong way. They think, oh, you can do anything? Well, remember the life review. Remember, it will ultimately show you treat others as you would like to be treated. So the best thing to do is make your choices to treat others as you would like to be treated. It's very, very simple. And yet most of our world kind of violates it these days. Part of it is with the internet and social media, clickbait. Fear is a gigantic push button. As FDR said, nothing to fear but fear itself. And in many ways, that is so deeply true, especially when we realize, and we can through meditation, centering prayer, different ways of connecting across the veil with that God mind, that we have that force on our side. But remember, your ego is not necessarily your ally in this. That's why I like to point out to people, for example, all addictions, alcohol, drug addiction, addiction to work, addiction to sex, addiction to love, addiction to exercise. I mean, people can have addiction to all kinds of things that can end up wrecking their life. And this is the point where you recognize that the ego is at the heart of all that. The ego is a little program running in our head. The ego is that little voice in your head. And I love how Michael Singer in his book, The Untethered Soul, he calls that voice in your head your annoying roommate. Very good way to put it. That is not our soul. That is not who we are. There's a higher soul in there, and that's what you can start connecting with that primordial mind through meditation and centering prayer, and start growing that. That ego, in many ways, is it's certainly not your ally in spiritual awakening. So this is, in many ways, kind of starting to develop a discernment between your kind of ego self and your higher soul self. And you start to recognize that there's much more going on within you that has to do with your connections and meaning and purpose in the universe as you cultivate that relationship with your higher soul and with that God force.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And that was one book that found me right after my near-death experience. So it was really an interesting read. So it helped make things make sense and connect some dots for me.
Sorry,
so I wanted to kind of dive into a little bit on the consciousness because the memory.
I'm sorry, which book was that you were just mentioning?
The Tethered Soul.
Oh yeah, Untethered Soul. Yeah, very good.
Yeah, yeah. So with the consciousness, and you talked about memories, a lot of people think they're stored in the mind, but they're not, because we do have the multiple layers of the body and the energy and vibration. Can you go a little bit into what you found out about that?
Well, I think the one important thing to say is neurosurgeons have been taking out brain tissue for 150, 120 years. And there's never been a case where they removed any part of brain and you had a loss of long-term memories. And those operations include hemispherectomies, which is removal of half the brain. It's used in young children when they have intractable epilepsy and seizures that can only be fixed by removing half the brain. And yet in those cases, you never find a swathe of long-term memories that disappear. So neurosurgeons have been forced to admit over this century plus of brain resections that memories do not appear to be stored in the brain. Now, Wilder Penfield is a Canadian neurosurgeon who was very renowned for his work stimulating the brain in awake patients back in the mid-20th century. Now, I did a lot of those operations myself, so I know exactly what all's involved. I defer to his wisdom. He's a very respected neurosurgeon who's spent his whole career doing that in many ways. And in his book, The Mystery of the Mind, published in 1975, he makes it very clear as a scientist, he's extremely excited that spiritual things of mental, what goes on in the mind cannot be fully explained by the brain. There's something much more necessary to explain it all. And to Penfield, this was very much a relief because it allowed him to recognize that we're spiritual beings in a spiritual universe and to be comfortable with that as an investigating neuroscientist. Well, sadly, his book was not understood 50 some years ago. But now we've got a lot more information that supports exactly where Penfield was coming from. A lot of that is in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe. But there are other great books supporting this notion of the one mind. I've mentioned BigelowInstitute.org. I will also point out that Dr. Pim van Lommel, who won second place award in that contest, at the end of his essay is working towards explanation of the one mind hypothesis. And he uses as scientific source material for that hypothesis our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, but also One Mind, a brilliant book by Dr. Larry Dossey that I highly recommend, another book by Steve Taylor called Spiritual Science, and finally, in Pim van Lommel's recommendations, is a paper by Bernardo Kastrup in the Journal of Consciousness Studies in 2018, and that paper is called The Universe in Consciousness. And those four, and I'd also recommend Pim van Lommel's book, Consciousness Beyond Life. It's also an excellent demonstration of the one mind hypothesis. This is where everything is headed in science, is this recognition of oneness of mind, and also a big piece of supporting evidence for this argument of the afterlife and reincarnation are the past life memories in children suggestive of reincarnation that have been studied, for example, at University of Virginia, the Division of Perceptual Studies there. So their website, uvadops.org, that's University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies. They've investigated more than 2,500 cases of past life memories in children suggestive of reincarnation. Of those investigated over the last 65 years or so, 1,700 plus have been solved. That is, they actually found the person who lived before. And when you read the literature and realize how carefully they collected this, make sure nobody was misleading themselves, there was no fraud, no false channels of information that weren't disclosed, et cetera, you start to realize, well, reincarnation is absolutely part of human existence. No question about it from a scientific viewpoint. But importantly, what those doctors who did that work, Dr. Ian Stevenson and Jim Tucker, will tell you is you must harvest those memories before age 6 or 7. Because after that age, most of those children no longer remember those past life and between life memory events. So this is very important. That's why most of us say, wait a minute, I don't remember past lives. What are you talking about? But a recent prospective paper from the University of Virginia, where they looked in advance at young children, they found that something like 7% of children in the modern era in the Western world will have these very strong past life memories. So it's a big number of people. It's not like a tiny little rare event. Many people, as you point out in your work, I know other people who work in past life regressions, hypnotic regression, et cetera, they'll support this too. I mean, this is where this incredible rich data comes from. So we need to understand that there's something much more about mind than just being created by the brain in the here and now, but that in fact, mind is unified. It's eternal. This soul sense of soul and interconnected soul relationships goes over multiple lifetimes. It's all building up the material of our how we advance consciousness, how we evolve consciousness, which is nothing more than individual sentient beings participating in this beautiful kind of revolution of understanding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I kind of look at it, is it like hanging out, are our memories hanging out there in like the cloud, or, are we actually, we're really connected to the other side. We have access to it. Only there's something that happens to us when like you said, when we turn like 6 or 7, that just cuts us off, whether it's we start buying into the human realm, and we forget our eternalness.
Well, I
And
think part of that is called amnesia of childhood. Very important concept. Most of us would agree, of course. And the idea is that our memories become more linguistically based as we get older. And by age 5, 6, or 7, we convert to where that linguistic kind of targeting dominates kind of our memory system. And we can no longer remember a lot of pre-verbal stuff. The stuff that happened when we were 1, 2, and 3 years old is no longer as easily accessible, although the memories are still there. And that's why regressionists, hypnotists, psychologists can help us get in touch with a lot of that kind of information.
right, right. So, and you also mentioned before, I think it was in one of your other interviews, I believe, or on your website, something about the filter theory. Can you go a little bit into that? Because I'm not really familiar with that.
I'm sorry, the soul.
The filter theory?
Oh, filter theory. Yes, absolutely. Sorry. It's an idea that basically has its origins in the late 1800s. William James, who was the head of psychology at Harvard University and often considered the father of American psychology, he studied a lot of spiritual cases and came to recognize that there had to be something more involved, more than just the brain, more than just physical reality to explain all this. And so he talked about the brain as a filter. Another term that they often used was reducing valve, filter or reducing valve. And so it's not just James, but also FCS Schiller, who was a British investigator, Frederick W.H. Meyer, who wrote an extensive study of afterlife kind of evidence. And that he published that book in 1903. Actually, it was published right after he died. But he was a huge supporter of filter theory, like also the French philosopher Henri Bergson. He probably originated the whole idea of the brain as a filter. And then Aldous Huxley, a renowned American, he wrote a book called The Doors of Perception, based on his experiences with mescaline, which is a serotonin 2A type psychedelic substance. And his experience showed him very clearly the brain is a reducing valve or a filter that allows that primordial unified mind to come in. So I think filter theory is a very important concept. It was big in the early 20th century. Then it kind of faded away with the kind of over eruption and frothing boil of materialist success in the mid and late 20th century. But all that was really just kind of overshadowing the fact that the brain is not the creator of consciousness. And now, luckily, the science, especially through quantum physics, the awarding of the Nobel Prize in Physics for entanglement in 2022. Entanglement is an admission, this is quantum entanglement, is basically an admission by the Nobel Committee that four-dimensional space-time is no longer the ultimate theater of operation of the physics that we understand. That's something Einstein held tightly to, because he called entanglement spooky action at a distance. He never thought it was real. He thought quantum physics was an incomplete theory. And that's why he was trying to preserve something called local realism. Local is just the notion that all physics involves particles touching other particles. So when I look at a star in the night sky, it's a photon coming from that star touching my retina that allows me to have that information that that star exists. So it's always particles touching particles. The realism part of local realism is that there's an objective physical world that exists out there independent of our observation. And what quantum physics shows us very clearly is that our observations not only reveal, but they create emerging reality. That's a paraphrase from Pascual Jordan, who was a renowned quantum physicist. But many quantum physicists were observing that consciousness was fundamental in the universe, and they were right on target, but they needed the bigger evidence out of the worlds of parapsychology, like the evidence for telepathy, like 35% of identical twins have powerful telepathic experiences, remote viewing, all the evidence for non-local consciousness, combined with these human experiences of near-death, after-death communication, shared death experiences, which are just like near-death, but happen in perfectly healthy people. All of this evidence now has created a scientific picture where it's irrefutable that the afterlife is real. Consciousness is not created by the brain, and that filter theory is a very valid way of considering this. And I would say that it's the quantum states of all those ion channels and synaptic vesicles in the brain that ultimately determines the fire or no fire of a neuron, but it's all dependent on top-down causality in the quantum field. And so you mentioned a little while ago where those memories are stored. The scientific term I would use is in the quantum hologram. That is what Edgar Mitchell, who was the Apollo 14 lunar module astronaut, who became a very good friend of mine. I stayed with him in Florida several times, visiting there in 2013, 14, giving talks. And he and Bob Steritz, in a paper they wrote in consciousness journals, said quantum hologram was the term they used. And I think that's probably the best way to say, okay, where are these memories stored? Where does anything and everything happen? It's in that quantum hologram, because the physical world, as we've demonstrated, is not objectively present as we sense it. Mm-hmm. And that's a very crucial point for the emerging kind of sense of reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is a good way to like put that in verbiage for understanding. And I think with the filter, you know, because if we didn't have the filter, you know, I think it's part of us being able to hone it and look at it from I guess, a linear point of view. Because if we had access to all the knowledge in the world, then why be here? But then also, like, it would be very overwhelming to have all access to all knowledge at the same time, like we have on the other side. And so we can kind of quantify that into like a more of a limited viewpoint through the sifting.
Right. Well, I think we can sense it. I mean, that's why meditation, centering prayer, hypnotic regression, these things are so powerful and often reveal past life events and things like that. So we can sense a lot, but a lot of that we cannot bring back in words, you know, but there's so much of what we can experience in that realm that's valuable to us as sentient beings because it's meaningful in our own lives. And yet we can't necessarily put every bit of that into an explanation in words for our fellow human beings. I think that's one of the reasons why in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, Karen and I not only spent a lot of time developing the scientific proof, first of all, that materialism is false. Second of all, that this form of evolutionary panentheism is a much better way of looking at it, above and beyond idealism in this primacy of mind and unity of mind. But we also get into a lot of practice, of meditation practice, talk a lot about sacred acoustics. And this is, I'd also like to mention there's a companion workbook which goes with Living in a Mindful Universe. Now, this companion workbook online is available for free to everybody, no charge at any time ever. And it's at ebenalexander.com. It's a 33-day journey into the heart of consciousness. You click on that little banner on the welcome page, put in your first name and an email address, and you're off and running to 33 days of an email each day with a major topic from the book and a brief discussion of that, often with a meditation. In fact, in this 33-day journey, you get 4 Sacred Acoustics meditation audio files at no charge. So they're all available in this. And also more than 14,000 people have taken this course over the last few years. They all leave their comments and experiences right there on each and every one of those 33 pages. So I highly encourage anybody out there who's interested by any of this. You don't have to put down a penny. Just go to ebenalexander.com, join that 33-day journey in the heart of consciousness, and you'll very quickly be off and running to learn so much more about this and how it can influence your life and how meditation can benefit you tremendously.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for offering that. That's beautiful. Yeah, because a lot of people may not have the money or want to spend the money on something and they don't know what they're going to get out of it. So thank you. Appreciate it. But meditation is really important. That was part of my journey after I came back from the near-death experience. The first thing that came to me was to start meditating. So I met somebody like a week after, and they taught me how to meditate because before that I didn't know anything, and that kind of just opened up a whole new world for me. So it is really important for meditation as like a daily practice, and I still do it every day. And that was back in 2010 that it happened. So I've been meditating every day.
Excellent. I'd like to point out also that Dr. Anna Newsom, who's a psychiatrist in New York City. She wrote a beautiful book on spiritual psychiatry. Her book is called Fulfilled. But the reason I mention her here is she did a study looking at sacred acoustics, at the tones that I use for deep meditation. And she basically used a set of files. It's called the Whole Mind Bundle on sacredacoustics.com. If you search Whole Mind Bundle, you'll find what I'm talking about. And she assessed this using a state trait anxiety inventory in her busy Manhattan, New York City practice, and found that over 2 weeks of listening to sacred acoustics, her patients had a 26% reduction in anxiety symptoms. That's compared to an only 7% reduction in anxiety symptoms in the control group. And those were people who got standard talk psychotherapy for anxiety. Now, that study was published in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease in February of 2020. So it was right at the beginning of the pandemic. And Karen Newell, who was the co-author of Living in a Mindful Universe, but also the co-founder of sacredacoustics.com, realized that there was going to be a lot of anxiety and turmoil, economic turmoil at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, not to mention turmoil from the ravages of a horrible virus like COVID virus itself. And so she dropped the price of the Whole Mind Bundle to $19, but she also gave a free button. The free button was there because she knew some people wouldn't have a penny to put into anything. That free button is still there. Out of the kindness of her heart, Karen has maintained access to this very powerful set of files that were the subject of Dr. Anna Newsom's very favorable report showing a true effect. Interestingly, that state trait anxiety inventory measures both your anxiety in the moment and your kind of baseline anxiety. And she found that both improved dramatically with listening to sacred acoustics. So not only did it make you better in this moment, but it made you better day by day by day in terms of alleviating anxiety. And God knows in our current kind of materialist paradigm dominated world, there's still a lot of anxiety. And it's a perfect time for people to start meditating. Go to Sacred Acoustics, find that Whole Mind Bundle and start. Also, there's a lot of information on sacredacoustics.com to help people with the practice of meditation. And especially so for people who've never meditated, but we have many very advanced meditators who find tremendous benefit from listening to the binaural beats, which basically causes powerful oscillation down in the lower brainstem. And that's what I believe allows them to give such a profound degree of relaxation, relief of anxiety, connection with higher soul, and connection with guides and with powers and forces of love beyond that veil.
Are you still practicing neuroscience?
Well, neurosurgery is
surgery?
something you cannot do part-time. And so I was actually working for Focused Ultrasound Surgery Foundation, doing a lot of global research on a promising new technology. That's what I was doing when I went into coma. I went back to that work within a few weeks, to the great shock of my colleagues, physicians who were amazed to see me actually alive after my NDE. But then I realized as I was writing all this up, and I was giving talks about it, starting 2 years before the book Proof of Heaven came out. And the problem was you can't do neurosurgery part-time. And I realized that this was taking up way more of my time than allowed for me to still be a practicing neurosurgeon. So 4 months before Proof of Heaven came out, back in June of 2012, that's when I finally had to let neurosurgery go once and for all. And I made a commitment that I was actually more important to this world by spreading this story than going back to my old life as a neurosurgeon, operating on one patient at a time and trying to save the world that way. I can do far more good by doing what I was following, what I have for the last 18 years, in promoting and telling my story, working with other scientists, trying to come to an understanding of how it all works, and contributing to a new model of how we can understand reality.
And do you have anything out there for meningitis, like what you found or discovered about healing it? I know you went through like a miraculous healing. Do you have anything out there that people can research or find on?
I think that the main thing to say is we all have a lot more power over our own healing than we might believe. Now, don't ignore what your doctors tell you to do. The best thing is to follow a good, sound medical advice But also remember, prayer and meditation can be incredibly powerful healers. And so start your regular practice, meditate every day, and take 10, 20 minutes, what have you. Many of the sacred acoustics, kind of what we call sound journeys, are 40 minutes long. So I often will meditate for 40 minutes, but then there are many other ways to extend that. And if you take the app, the Sacred Acoustics app on the iPhone in particular, but there's also one for Android devices. But that app is very, very useful. You can turn off the voice when you've gotten used to it. I usually listen to the voice guidance, verbal guidance on a Sacred Acoustics file early on, just to get the intent, because each Sacred Acoustics tone set is different. They have different intentions, different purposes, and you get to know them by listening to them with verbal guidance on. But then the verbal guidance can just get in the way, because that just brings you back into the here now sense of self. And we're actually trying to escape all that. The best way to escape it is to have no verbal guidance at all. So once you're used to a particular Sacred Acoustics tone on the app, you can turn the voice volume down to 0. And that works perfectly. If you get them by CDs or downloads, you have a verbal version and nonverbal version. So that's the way you handle that. And also, if you buy them through the sacredacoustics.com website, you never have to pay again for any title. Once you own it in any format, you can get it in any other format. So Karen's very good and responsible with her client population about making sure that they get the biggest bang for their buck. And she also has a page on sacredacoustics.com that helps you with any particular goal for meditation you might have. So anyway, just check out her website. There's a tremendous amount of good information there, very helpful in meditation. And also, don't forget that 33-day journey at ebenalexander.com. And likewise, I would say that at ebenalexander.com, there's also an extremely useful reading list, active reading list that's categorized and also has hot links to many of the scientific papers. My CV and bibliography are also available on the website. A lot of interviews I've done, audio and video podcasts, etc., all available there. There's an FAQ page that's very important to people who have questions about my experience, and just a lot of information about the books and their endorsers. You'll find that some of the greatest scientific minds studying consciousness today have endorsed our third book, Living in a Mindful Universe.
Beautiful. Now, do you ever see science and spirituality coming together at some point? Because I feel like when we do work on ourselves and heal, we really need the mind, body, spirit. Doing it separately doesn't really help. But if we come at it from a point of, okay, so even if we have to do it separately, we want to incorporate each of that. It's kind of like what you were saying.
Separation leads to confusion.
Mhm.
Science and spirituality strengthen each other. They are absolutely essential parts of each other. When we recognize we're spiritual beings in a spiritual universe, just as Dr. Wilder Penfield realized back in 1975, but now we have far more scientific data supporting his position. And we're spiritual beings in a spiritual universe. Science is the pathway to understanding. A deeper understanding of quantum physics is right at the core of understanding time and consciousness, at their most basic levels. One of the biggest problems with materialist science was it tried to split everything apart. Reductive materialism was the name of their game. And there you were splitting everything down into subatomic particles, photons, electrons, quarks, and then pretending that if you understand how all those particles interact, you can understand all of emerging reality. But that misses the point that the only thing we're actually witnessing is the inside of our own consciousness. And it's referring to that quantum hologram, but it's not referring to a physical world that has an objective existence independent of our observation. That's why that entanglement Nobel Prize in 2022 was so absolutely essential for moving beyond the false, bleak, and paltry fiction of materialism towards a deeper, more holistic understanding of the nature of reality from a scientific viewpoint, which also has to be from a united spiritual viewpoint, because it's all one universe, one God force that we all share.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Is there any other topics that you would like to add that we haven't covered yet?
I think you've done an excellent job of covering pretty much everything. I just hope my audio has been sufficient so people can hear me well enough.
Beautiful.
But yes, thanks for this invitation. I think you've done a great job. And I would just remind people, no soul left behind. This revolution in understanding is one that will save our world because it has to do with oneness, compassion, kindness, and taking care of each other, which is not at the top of the list from some of our political leaders in the modern world. And those political leaders who would, stand for narcissistic, materialistic defeat and competition of all of our, alleged enemies, those political leaders need to go. They are no longer useful to this world. And in fact, they're very damaging and destructive of this world. And it's time for individual humans and humanity to rise up and claim this world as the place of human beings and their thriving, and not where any nation state can dominate other nation states. That whole mode of thinking has to go away. So blessings and peace to all of your listeners, and blessings to all in their journey forward.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your wisdom and knowledge.
Well, Laura, thanks for having me on. Blessings to you.
Thank you.